The office was unusually quiet that evening. Emma Carter stayed behind after everyone had gone home, her desk light the only glow in the wide glass building. The rain outside had turned into a steady rhythm against the windows, soft but constant. She had stayed late many times before, but that night felt different, lonelier somehow. The silence echoed around her as she tried to focus on the stack of reports she had promised to finish before morning. Emma was 42, senior marketing manager in a Chicago firm. She had built a life that looked perfect from the outside: career, house, marriage, but inside, things had begun to feel empty. Her husband, Michael, had grown distant over the years, their conversations shorter, their dinners quieter. He was kind but distracted, always buried in his work or on his phone. Lately, she felt more like a roommate than a wife. That night, as she stared at the flickering cursor on her computer screen, she sighed. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes, realizing she hadn't eaten since lunch. Just one more page, she whispered to herself. But then she heard something, a faint sound behind her, like footsteps. She froze. Everyone had left hours ago. She glanced around, the shadows stretching across the open plan office. "Hello," she called softly, half laughing at her own nerves. There was no answer. She stood up and walked toward the elevator area, her heels clicking on the polished floor. That's when she saw him, Daniel Reed, the new head of design. He was standing near the large window, holding his jacket as if deciding whether to leave. He turned, startled by her voice. "Oh, Emma, I didn't realize anyone else was still here," he said with a small smile. Emma laughed nervously. "You scared me. I thought I was alone." Daniel chuckled. "Sorry about that. I stayed back to finish the presentation for tomorrow's client meeting. Guess we both had the same idea." For a moment, the tension broke. Emma relaxed. Daniel had joined the company only 3 months ago. But he had already made an impression: confident, creative, and friendly with everyone. There was something easy about the way he spoke, something warm. They chatted briefly about work, the usual office talk, but soon their conversation drifted. Daniel mentioned that he had just moved to Chicago from Seattle, that he missed the rain but not the long gray winters. Emma smiled. "I grew up near here. Chicago winters make you strong." As they talked, the clock kept ticking. Emma hadn't realized how late it was until she glanced at her phone. 9:45 p.m. She should have left an hour ago. But for some reason, she didn't feel like rushing home. The house would be dark. Michael would already be asleep in front of the TV. Daniel noticed her hesitation. "Do you live far from here?" he asked. "Not really," she said. "About 20 minutes. My husband usually drives, but he's away this week. Conference in Denver." "Ah," Daniel nodded. "Then I guess we're both working late because there's no one waiting at home tonight." His tone wasn't flirty, more like understanding. But something in his words made Emma feel seen. She gave a small, sad smile. "Yeah, something like that." The rain outside grew heavier, blurring the city lights. Daniel walked closer to the window, watching the streets below. "You know," he said quietly, "it's funny how life slows down when you're alone. You notice things you never do during the day." Emma joined him by the glass, standing a few feet away. "Like what?" she asked. "The reflection," he said, gesturing at their faint images in the window. "You can't tell if you're looking out or in." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain. Emma looked at Daniel's reflection, his expression thoughtful, his face softened by the light. She didn't know why, but something stirred in her chest. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was recognition, someone else who understood what it felt like to be seen, but not truly known. She broke the silence. "You should probably get going. It's getting late." He nodded but didn't move. "I will just—" "Not yet." His voice was quiet but steady. Emma hesitated. There was a pull between them, not spoken, not even clear, but there. She tried to push it away. "I should finish these reports," she said quickly, stepping back toward her desk. Daniel smiled gently. "You're too dedicated. It's called responsibility," she said with a playful tone. trying to lighten the air. But as she sat back down, she couldn't focus anymore. The words on the screen blurred. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked up to see him still standing there. Finally, she laughed softly. "You're not leaving, are you?" "Maybe not," he said, smiling. "It's quieter here than home." Emma tilted her head. "You live alone?" He nodded. "For now, yes. My girlfriend and I broke up before I moved here. It was complicated." Something in his voice told her not to ask more, so she didn't. But she felt a pang of empathy. "I'm sorry," she said. He shrugged. "Life happens. You learn to start over." She smiled faintly. "Starting over sounds nice. Would you?" he asked, curiosity in his tone. Emma paused. "If I could, maybe. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to be seen again, not just as someone's wife or someone's boss, but as me." Daniel's gaze met hers. Then steady, quiet, but full of something unspoken. "I see you," he said softly. For a heartbeat, Emma didn't breathe. His words hit her deeper than she expected. She looked away, pretending to straighten a stack of papers. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured. "I didn't mean anything wrong," he said quickly. "Just honesty." The rain grew louder. Emma felt her chest tighten not in fear, but in a strange kind of awakening. She hadn't felt this alive in years. "Maybe we should go," she said, standing abruptly. "Before we both start saying things we'll regret." Daniel nodded, picking up his jacket. "You're right." But then he stopped by the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Emma, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," she said. "It's just been a long day." He smiled faintly. "Then let's both call it a night." She watched him leave, the sound of the elevator doors closing echoing through the empty office. Emma sank back into her chair, her heart beating faster than it should. She wasn't sure what had just happened. Nothing. Really, but it felt like something had shifted. She looked out the window again, the reflection showing her face under the dim light. She whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" But deep down, she already knew the answer. The next morning, she came to work early, telling herself it was just another day. She had slept barely 2 hours, replaying their conversation in her mind. When Daniel walked in later, their eyes met briefly across the room. No words were exchanged, but the air between them felt different, charged, careful, alive. Emma buried herself in work. But her heart wasn't cooperating. She told herself she was being foolish, that it was just loneliness talking. But as the hours passed, she couldn't ignore the quiet thrill that came with seeing him by lunch. Daniel walked past her desk, his tone casual. "You want to grab a coffee later?" It sounded innocent, but her pulse quickened. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, why not?" As he walked away, Emma felt the weight of the choice settle in. She told herself it was just coffee. Just conversation. Nothing more. But a quiet voice inside her whispered that life was about to change. And for the first time in years, she didn't know if she was ready or if she wanted to stop it. The next afternoon was colder than usual. A light wind swept through the Chicago streets, stirring fallen leaves across the pavement. Emma walked out of the office building with a sense of nervous energy she couldn't explain. She had agreed to meet Daniel for coffee, telling herself it was nothing, just a colleagues grabbing a quick break. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. Daniel was already there when she arrived at the small cafe around the corner. He was sitting by the window, his sleeves rolled up, a book lying unopened beside his cup. When he saw her, he smiled in that calm, easy way that always disarmed her. "Hey, you made it," he said. Barely, Emma laughed, shaking the rain from her coat. "My meeting ran long. Then coffee's exactly what you need," he replied, standing to pull out her chair. It was a small gesture, but one that made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. They ordered, talked about work at first, and laughed about small things, the office gossip. A client's ridiculous request, the broken elevator that kept trapping people between floors. But soon their conversation shifted naturally, like water finding its own flow. Daniel told her about his family back in Seattle, how his parents still called every Sunday, and how he sometimes missed the ocean. Emma shared bits about her early years in Boston, her college dreams. and how life had taken turns she never expected. She didn't realize how much she had been holding back until then. For the first time in a long while, she felt heard. Daniel didn't interrupt, didn't rush her words, he just listened. And that alone was enough to make her chest tighten. "Do you ever feel," she said softly, stirring her coffee, "like you built a life that doesn't feel like yours anymore?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Every day. That's why I moved here. I thought maybe if I started fresh, I'd finally feel like I belonged somewhere." Their eyes met, steady, quiet, honest. Emma looked away, her throat tight. She wanted to say something, but she didn't trust herself to. When they left the cafe, the sky had turned gray again. Daniel walked her back to the office, his hands in his pockets. At the entrance, he stopped. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Thanks for asking," she replied. There was a pause, a small, still moment when the world around them seemed to slow. Then Daniel said softly, "I'm glad you stayed that night. If you hadn't, I probably wouldn't have talked to you at all." Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe it was meant to happen." Kay gave a quiet laugh. "Maybe." She went home that evening with her thoughts spinning. Michael had texted her once, just a reminder about a bill that needed paying. Nothing else. She cooked dinner alone, turned on the TV, and sat in silence. But her mind wasn't in that living room. It was still at that cafe, hearing Daniel's voice, seeing his smile for the first time in years. She felt something stirring inside her, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of wanting more than routine. But that realization scared her too. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Daniel grew closer. It wasn't planned, it just happened. Sometimes they'd stay late working on campaigns together. Other times they'd grab lunch or walk to the train station after work, talking about everything and nothing. There was a rhythm between them, unspoken but steady. And though they never crossed any line, the air around them always seemed to hum with something unacknowledged. Emma began to notice the little things. It's the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. The way his voice dropped when he said her name. Once, he brushed a strand of hair from her face when the wind blew it across her cheek. It was such a small gesture, but it sent her heart racing. That night, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. "You're being foolish," she told herself. But she couldn't ignore how alive she felt whenever Daniel was near. Still, guilt crept in. Michael was her husband. They had shared years together, built a life. She knew she had no right to crave something more, yet the emptiness between them felt impossible to bridge. He barely noticed her anymore. Some nights they didn't even speak. One Friday, Daniel invited her to join a group of colleagues for dinner. She hesitated, but went anyway. They sat at a long table, laughter and conversation flowing easily. Daniel sat beside her, close enough that his arm brushed hers occasionally. Every touch sent tiny sparks through her. When the dinner ended, everyone drifted off in different directions. Daniel offered to walk her to her car. The city was quiet, the air cool. As they reached her car, Emma turned to thank him and saw that look in his eyes again. The one that made her forget her words. "Daniel," she whispered, "we shouldn't." "I know," he said softly. "But sometimes knowing doesn't stop how you feel." Emma felt tears press behind her eyes. "It's not fair to anyone." He nodded. "I don't want to make things harder for you." "You're not," she said. "You're just making me remember what it feels like to be seen." The silence that followed was heavy, but gentle. Then Daniel took a slow breath. "Maybe we should take some space." She nodded, even though it hurt. Maybe that's best. For the next few days, they avoided each other. Emma threw herself into work, tried to ignore the hollow feeling that followed her everywhere. But fate had other plans. One evening, a major project crisis broke out. A client wanted last-minute changes before a big presentation. Emma and Daniel were assigned to fix it. They stayed late again, just like that first night. As the clock ticked past midnight, exhaustion set in. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I think we've done all we can for tonight." Emma smiled faintly. "We make a good team." He looked at her, his expression softer now. "Yeah, we do. The office was silent again, just like before. Emma felt that same mix of fear and longing. "Do you ever wish things were simpler?" she asked. "Every day," he said quietly. "But maybe simplicity isn't what we're meant for." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the lights below. "I don't want to lose what we have," he said, "even if it's just friendship." Emma joined him by the window. "Neither do I." He turned toward her. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world outside disappeared. But then she stepped back. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't ruin everything I've built." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand." He smiled, sad but sincere. "You're stronger than you think, Emma." She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that walking away was the right thing, even if it left her feeling hollow. They packed up their things and left the office. The elevator ride was silent. When the doors opened to the lobby, Daniel stepped out first, then turned back. "Take care, Emma. You too," she said softly. That night she sat in her car for a long time before driving home. The rain had started again, tapping gently on the windshield. She felt the ache of what could have been and the weight of what still was at home. Michael was awake for once, sitting on the couch. "You're late," he said without looking up from the TV. "Work emergency," she replied, hanging her coat. He nodded, barely reacting. Emma looked at him, her husband, her life partner, and felt the strange distance between them stretch wider. She sat beside him, forcing a smile. "You want tea?" "Sure," he said, absent lie. In that moment, Emma realized something painful, yet clear. It wasn't Daniel who had changed her, was the realization that she had been living half a life. Daniel had simply made her see it. Later that night, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling. Her heart was heavy, but not with guilt, rather, with understanding. She couldn't change the past, but maybe she could change the future. And as sleep pulled her under, one thought lingered. Sometimes the most dangerous feelings aren't the ones acted on there, the ones left unsaid. The following weeks moved quietly for Emma. The city, once full of color, now felt gray and still. Work continued as usual, but something inside her had shifted. She avoided Daniel when she could, not out of anger, but because every glance reminded her of everything unspoken. They exchanged polite smiles in meetings, short professional words, and nothing more. It was as if they had silently agreed to bury whatever had grown between them. At home, things weren't better. Michael was still distant. He spent most evenings on his phone or laptop, his mind somewhere Emma could no longer reach. They ate dinner in silence, exchanged mechanical goodnights, and lived like two polite strangers sharing the same roof. Emma tried to start conversations about the garden, about his work, about maybe taking a small trip together, but he always gave short answers that ended things before they began. One night she stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the dark yard. Her reflection looked older than she remembered. Tired eyes, quiet face. She wondered when she had stopped being the woman who used to laugh at the smallest things, who used to believe in warmth and surprises. The next morning, she arrived at work early. The office was empty, and she felt a strange calm walking through the quiet halls. When she reached her desk, she found a small envelope waiting there. Her name was written in Daniel's handwriting. Her heart tightened. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you for being kind when you didn't have to be. You reminded me that good people still exist. I'm leaving the company next week. Take care of yourself. You deserve to be happy." Emma sat there for a long time, staring at the words. She didn't realize tears had filled her eyes until one dropped onto the paper. Daniel was leaving. It's just like that, quietly, respectfully, the way he had always done everything, for the rest of the day. She went through her tasks mechanically. When Daniel passed her in the hallway later that afternoon, he smiled faintly, as though they both knew it was goodbye long before either said it. That night, Emma told Michael about Daniel's departure. "He's moving to Seattle again," she said, hoping maybe the conversation could bridge something between them. Michael didn't even look up from his phone. "Oh, that's too bad," he said simply. Emma felt something inside her break, not dramatically, but like a quiet thread finally snapping after years of strain. She nodded, stood up, and went upstairs without another word. A few days later, Daniel's last day came. The office threw a small farewell gathering, coffee, cupcakes, polite laughter. Everyone wished him luck. Emma stayed in the background, smiling when he glanced her way but keeping her distance. When the crowd thinned out, Daniel approached her. "I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye," he said. Emma forced a small smile. "You didn't have to. I understand." He shook his head. "You don't. You changed how I see people, Emma. You reminded me what honesty feels like." She swallowed hard. "You did the same for me." There was a long pause. Then Daniel nodded. "Maybe someday, in a different life, things would have been easier." "Maybe," she whispered. He reached out gently, touching her arm, just a soft, respectful gesture, and then walked away. She watched him go, her eyes blurring as he disappeared through the glass doors. That evening, Emma walked home instead of taking the train. The air was cold, but she didn't mind. The city lights shimmered against the wet streets, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. When she got home, Michael was sitting in the living room watching TV as usual. She stood there for a moment, looking at him, really looking. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. He muted the TV, surprised. "Sure. What's going on?" Emma sat down across from him, her hands folded tightly. "Do you still love me?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "What kind of question is that?" She asked with a nervous laugh. "A real one," she said quietly. "Guess I can't feel it anymore." Michael frowned. "Emma, we've been married for years." "Of course I love you." "Then why do I feel like I live alone?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We don't talk. We don't laugh. You don't even see me anymore." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're overthinking again. We've both just been busy." "That's all." Emma shook her head slowly. "No, it's not just busy, it's empty." Michael looked away, silent. The TV flickered behind him, filling the quiet with faint noise. Finally, he said, "What do you want me to do, Emma?" "I'm doing my best." "Then tell me, when was the last time you looked at me and saw your wife, not just someone sitting across the table?" she asked, tears threatening. He didn't answer. Emma stood up. "I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. I'm just asking you to care again. Try." Michael looked up at her finally, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I didn't realize how far we drifted," he admitted. "I'm sorry." Emma nodded. "Then maybe this is where we start again." That night, for the first time in months, they talked. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. About their jobs, their fears, how routine had stolen their closeness. They stayed up late, just sitting together. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It was healing. Over the next few weeks, small changes began to appear. Michael started leaving work earlier. They cooked dinner together sometimes, even laughed once or twice. It wasn't magic. It was awkward, slow, but real. Emma didn't see Daniel again. But one day, she received a postcard from Seattle. It was from him, found a place near the ocean. It feels peaceful. I hope you found your peace too. Emma smiled when she read it. She placed the postcard in a drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it as a quiet reminder, not of longing, but of change. Months passed and life began to settle again. Emma joined a pottery class, something she had always wanted to do. Michael came to one of her showcases and surprised her with flowers. The warmth between them was fragile, but growing. One Sunday morning, while they were having breakfast, Michael looked at her and said, "You seem happier lately." Emma smiled. "Maybe I finally remembered who I am." He nodded. "I guess I forgot that too. I'm glad you reminded me." There was something new in his tone, a softness she hadn't heard in years. Later that day, while folding laundry, Emma found one of Daniel's old notes tucked in a book she'd borrowed from the office before he left. She read it again. The same line stood out. "You deserve to be happy." This time, she smiled without sadness. She realized happiness didn't always come from new beginnings. Sometimes it came from finding light in the same place you thought had gone dark. That evening, she stepped out to the balcony as the sun dipped low. The city lights blinked to life, gentle and warm. Michael came out behind her, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, stood quietly beside her. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt at peace. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real, full of choices, regrets, and second chances. And that was enough. As the breeze brushed past her face, she thought of Daniel. Not with longing, but with gratitude. Some people come into our lives not to stay, but to wake us up. He had done that. She reached for Michael's hand. He squeezed it gently, and in that quiet moment, Emma finally understood. Love isn't about finding someone new. It's about remembering the reason you loved in the first place and choosing it again every day.